Hi, and welcome to People First, a Lotus People podcast. In a world that's constantly evolving, this podcast exists to inspire people-centric leaders to navigate through these ever-changing times. We're excited to share stories, build a community, and learn from one another. We're your hosts, Sophie Thomas and Sinead Connolly, and we run award-winning recruitment agency, Lotus People. Having been in the recruitment industry for 12 plus years, we've had the privilege of engaging with some incredible organisations and leaders. And we didn't want to keep these insights to ourselves. So we're bringing you inside some of these discussions, focusing on the most prevalent topics in the market right now. Join us as we dive deep into the heart of leadership, exploring the challenges and opportunities shaping today's workplace. You can expect candid conversations, practical advice, and inspiring stories from leaders who are making a real difference. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the People First community.
All right, we are officially recording. Over to you, Sophie.
Nicola, welcome to People First, a Lotus People podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Obviously, recently you were a panelist at our Future of Work event in Brisbane, which received phenomenal feedback from our audience. So I think that one of the big things they really loved was just your insights, and we're really excited to have the opportunity to just dive a bit deeper with you today. I think that the point of this podcast is to really share wisdom from amazing people like yourself. So let's kick things off. And for our listeners who might not be as familiar with your work, could you share a really brief overview of your current role?
Yeah, sure. And thanks both for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. So I'm Nick Young. I'm the head of people for APAC and Japan for Cognizant. Cognizant, for those who don't know, is a very large IT professional services company. So we have now about 340,000 people worldwide and about 1,600 in Australia. So I've been in this role around 3 years and have been in professional services for the majority of my career, but I've also spent some time in retail and the restaurant industry. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. That's a big, broad scope in terms of humans to be looking after and thinking about from a people leadership perspective. And I think, and obviously it's so good to have you here, Nick. As Sophie said, we're very excited to continue this conversation on the back of what was an amazing conversation when we got to do it in person. I guess in thinking about leadership and where I sort of wanted to start is, from my perspective at the moment, I think there's obviously so much going on from a change perspective, from an AI and tech sort of transformation, evolution perspective. We've obviously had COVID. The market at the moment is not the easiest market we've been in. I personally think it is a difficult time to be a leader. There's a lot going on. From your experience, I mean, what do you think makes a strong people leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the reality is it's multifaceted, right? When you talk about, the difficulty of the market at the moment, I think that does impact people in roles as leaders because people become fearful when the market is like this. So I think the number one thing for me in terms of a characteristic is exhibiting trust. And that has two parts for me. I think that's having trust in yourself, that you are capable, that you can do your job. Because if you don't trust yourself, you then start to feel threatened. And when you start to feel threatened, you start to exhibit behaviors that are detrimental to your team. So trusting yourself, part one, and then second, trusting your team, which is not an easy thing, right? At times, everybody would like to say, yeah, I trust my team, until they make a mistake and then it all goes pear-shaped, right? And so how you react to things, how you exhibit that trust, them knowing that you have their back, that you are clear on expectations, that you're going to give them feedback in an unemotional but factual way, and that you take accountability for the team. Building that trust and that security for me is absolutely fundamental to any relationship. So I think trust is one part. I think the second part is for you as a leader having a growth mindset. So you cannot afford to be the leader who stands still. You've got to be that person who is thirsty for information, for knowledge, for learning, for feedback. If you're going to tell your teams that those things are important, you better make sure you're doing that yourself, right? So you only evolve through feedback, and that can be a scary thing sometimes, but I think it's really important that you open yourself up to that and really commit to that ongoing growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I absolutely love that. I think there's a million answers to that question. And I honestly am like scribbling notes as you're saying that. I'm like, I know that we're here and I can listen back to this, but like that they were such helpful answers. And on the second point, it really reminds me of Soph, like how you approach leadership from a growth and learning perspective. Like Soph and I have known each other a couple of years, and I don't think I've met anyone who is hungrier for knowledge and hungrier to sort of just keep themselves upskilling, and the amount of things we've sort of gone through, which is amazing. And it is. And I mean, Soph, you feel so strongly about this, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the knowledge bank is absolutely, and I think I was listening to, I think it was Simon Sinek, one of his YouTube videos a couple of weeks ago, and just talking, like listening to that, and the book, I can't remember what it's called, Starting with Why, I think it is. But like just thinking about like having your knowledge bank, like it's one of them things, and even Stephen Bartlett talks about it a lot. Like for me, that growth situation, like I genuinely am curious about most things, which is where it's quite easy for me to plug into podcasts. Like I'm genuinely kind of interested in all sorts of things. But I think it's also one of them things that, how do you encourage people to do that? Like naturally, I'm that kind of person, but I also have worked alongside leaders who aren't that interested in that. And I think that's one of them things that, yeah, how do you encourage people to focus on self-development and growth? Because naturally we know that when we improve ourselves, we do filter that down and we share this wisdom, we share knowledge with other people. And I think it's a huge thing to have, but yeah.
You have the answer to that.
Look, it's a hard one, right? Some people are at a stage in their career where they're like, oh, I've learned everything I'm going to learn at this point. And what I tend to do with our leaders is I'll just send them little bits and pieces of little bombs, I call them now and again, to go, oh, look at this article, look at this, listen to this podcast, look at this book, and I will just send them things. Because I think particularly when you get over a certain age, and I will say I'm in that age group, so I'm allowed to say it, you do start to get a little bit too comfortable. But the reality is the world changes at such a pace, right? And you're managing people who are potentially 30 years younger than you, and you have to be current, otherwise you're not going to be a success in managing those people. So I think it's trying to drip feed that stuff constantly to your leadership, and also recognizing that people have different triggers, right? For me, I'm a massive reader, so it's easy for me to get hold of that stuff. Other people are not interested, but everybody's got time in the car. God, I hate to think about how much time I spend in the car. Or you've got, you can watch a quick YouTube video, and we are consumers of that stuff now, right? Everybody's on social media. It's not hard. So it's just finding the trigger for people to have that kind of 60-second learning, if that's what it takes, I think.
Yeah, I think you're so right with that as well. And even myself, like I love the idea of sitting and reading books. Like I find it relaxing. I just can't physically retain the information, and I really struggle with that. So for me, I know that listening to audiobooks and podcasts, and again, it's like I've got a busy life. I've got 2 kids. I've got a chaotic work schedule. But for me, like in the car when I do drop-offs and pickups, or if I'm cooking, like I've permanently got my AirPods in between things. I think the biggest bit, and I know again where a lot of people do this, is where you consume so much information. It's then reminding yourself, okay, well, I need to do something with it. And I think that, again, that action is equally as important when you are learning it. But yeah, definitely see the difference between even people at Lotus. We've got people like Amy who learns in a particular way, and I'm slightly different. And it's just understanding your leadership teams as well.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, though. So like, you've learned so much. How do you distill it into something that's actionable for you? And I definitely still have moments all the time, actually, where I remind myself of something I might have learned 5 years ago, you know, whether it's through an experience or doing something the wrong way. And I did start doing, and I just revised it. I did myself a little charter on one page that I've stuck in front of on my wall, which is things I've learned about how to manage people. And it does help because it's right there, right? So there are some things, I know I've got some bad habits, I will say that, and some things that I default through. And if I'm under pressure and I'm a little bit tired, those come out even more. So I think it's important to have them in your face to kind of go, no, you're going down that path, course correct.
Yeah, no, really valid. Cool. Well, look, I think for me, I guess, again, Sinead's kind of talked about the world of work is constantly evolving. I think something that we're quite intrigued by is what kind of skills do you think maybe a leader of tomorrow would need to have? Obviously, there's a lot of, especially in the P&C space at the moment, I'm speaking to a lot of times, and the situations are that people are being promoted quite quickly. They're maybe not having the training. Maybe they've been really successful at their actual role, and then they've gone, great, you're brilliant in your job. Let's go and be a people leader. And they don't get the kind of training as such. And I know it happens a lot. I guess if you were thinking about those types of people, what kind of skills do you think that they need to be learning to be that kind of future leader?
Yeah, no, it's such a great question. And yeah, that is happening in spades at the moment, I think. And I think as well, some people, leaders, are feeling very overwhelmed by the responsibility. And when they're overwhelmed, there's a number of reactions to that, right? But I find the most popular one is just putting your head in the sand and hoping it's all going to go away.
Is that not
working? And don't come back out.
Yeah. I'm just going to hide in my shed and hope it all goes away. But I think for me, and this topic encompasses a range of skills, I think, but I think I would summarize it as building psychological safety. I think that is the number one topic for me. And this comes in many guises, right? And we've talked about trust, and trust is really important. But it's also about, as a leader, do you have an understanding of your impact? You know, do you know how you're coming across to your team or to your stakeholders? We all have a vision in our head, I think, of the leader we think we are. But until you ask that question, until you kind of put yourself out there, you don't really know. So what are you giving off as a leader at the moment that is either making your team a success or inhibiting your team? So I think having that self-awareness primarily. I think, again, we talk about these topics a lot, having empathy. Having empathy is absolutely fundamental. We have not lived the lives of the people we're managing, right? We don't know where they've come from typically, what they've been through. So having empathy is key. But somebody told me this a very long time ago, and it stuck with me my entire career. The biggest compliment you can give somebody is to listen to them. And I think that's so true. And just listening and making them feel that they have your full attention, which in a busy world of work, I know is a challenge, is absolutely fundamental. And then allowing a culture where it's okay to get things wrong. And I think I'm very much an advocate of progress over perfection. We would like to think we can have perfection. The reality is people are messy. Right. And we're all a bit messy. We've all got things going on. And that means that sometimes things happen to a great standard, and sometimes they don't. And you have to allow your team to experiment, fail, get back up, try again. Because if you don't, you're really never going to get any innovation out of your team. You'll just keep doing the tried and tested standard stuff. So I think building that safety around your team through having an awareness of yourself, listening with empathy, and allowing a fail first culture is absolutely fundamental, regardless of your age, your level of experience, whatever your team mix is. I think those are the things that, from what people tell me and what I listen to, make a real difference.
Yeah. I absolutely love that. And I think specifically where you're saying listen to them, I think so often as leaders that somebody will come to you with a problem and you'll just naturally want to give them the answer. Whereas actually how often you listen to them and they know the answer most of the time, but you're almost removing that opportunity from them. And then they're getting really reliant on you. And actually it's you taking that ownership. And I think even putting that back 100%. On them really gives them that opportunity to feel safe and feel like they can speak. And the failure piece, like I could not agree with you more. And even conversations I'm having with my 13-year-old daughter at the moment, I feel like everyone needs to know that to grow, you have to fail. And failure isn't an issue. It shouldn't be something that's frowned upon. Like if anything, and Stephen Bartlett talks about this on so many of his episodes of his podcast. He spoke about it at his Brisbane event, but there is a phrase, I can't remember what it is, and I'll come back to it. But ultimately just talking about how the fact that we should praise people for failure. It knows they're getting out of their comfort zone, and it's not doing things recklessly. Like that's a very different conversation, but just being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Like it's really getting out of that comfort zone and kind of actually looking at opportunities to go, we could do this and we can try it and that's okay. And if it doesn't work, we move on. And I think there's the conversation with Amazon where they've actually failed more times than they've not. Because they're just not scared to bring products out and give it a go. And typically what happens is you might have 2 products that do really well and 100 that didn't, but actually the 2 that did really well, they did really well. And that was the success of the whole business. So when you look at those types of stories, I think it just does. But I think, really, really resonate with all of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I completely agree from a comfort zone perspective. I think it's similar to what we were saying before. Sort of you can you can put the hands over your eyes and ears and hide away. But I from setting up a business so young, I was 27 when I opened Lotus, and I was so afraid of so many things, even going on big client meetings and having to present and like all of these things. It just felt so scary. Doing something like this, I probably would have not left the house for a month in advance with a state of agoraphobia. But I can, it's almost like if I look back on the last 9 years of Lotus, I can literally see it, almost visualize the comfort zone expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding. And I think as leaders, to be able to facilitate that for other people as well, and to provide, as you said, the psychological safety to enable them to sort of step out and sort of continue to grow and expand. I think it is the biggest reward. Looking back on my whole career, I think that stepping out of the comfort zone and moving forward before you were ready. So stepping in the room before you were ready, and then knowing that once you're in the room, you'll figure it out. I think that is one of the best things that you can do, and support your people in doing as well. Not to say that it's been easy, because it hasn't. Not always easy. And
the things that are worthwhile never are, right? So
exactly right. And I suppose with that in mind, thinking about the hard parts or the challenging parts from your perspective, Nick, what was one of the hardest lessons that you've had to learn as a people leader that sort of, I guess, set you on a different or a better track?
Yeah, I mean, it's always painful remembering these things, right? And I've had, like many people, moments in my career which have not been comfortable. I think one of my biggest learnings is, and honest, I'll be really honest, I only probably learned this about 6 years ago, and it was a psychologist who gave me this tip, and it was, do something because you want to, not because you're expecting thanks for it, or just don't do it at all. And I think one of the things that I felt during my career is you can really, in your mind, you're putting yourself out for people sometimes, right? You're working hard to get them a promotion or a compensation increase, or giving them some extra flexibility or whatever it is. And then they go and resign, and you think, okay, what was the point? What did I get out of that then? The reality is that what you're getting out of that is you're getting the great performance for the time they're with you. And that's really all you can expect from anyone. So I think that's kind of a bit double-sided. It's just like, stop having expectations of, payback, but do things because you want to do them and because they're the right thing. And And what I've learned through that is actually really freeing, doing things because you want to do them with no expectation of thanks, because you do them with the right intent, but you also do them with no expectations. And I think people feel that, and I think they appreciate it. And what it actually does is it builds your brand as a leader, because you're not emotional about things any longer. So people want to work for you and they're happy to work for you. And when they leave, they've only got good things to say about you. And we've had some, we've had some challenging, I've dealt with some challenging situations over the years where we've had to let people go in companies, and really good people, really, really good people, and it's been horrible decisions to make. But I've been able to maintain a relationship with them because we've had that level of kind of reciprocity and understanding. So I think helping people expecting nothing in return is probably my biggest one.
I love that. And I think it's something that I've had to learn over the years as well, and particularly in a small business when it's your baby and you are very, I mean, we're all emotionally invested in what we do, presumably, but exactly that, when you sort of you feel like you're giving, and then if someone resigns or if something like that happens, it can kind of cut you. And it has taken me, my maturity around that over the years has changed drastically, because at the beginning it did just feel like it was a personal attack. And now, a different lens, I can see, of course, it's a million other things, and not a personal attack, not a reflection. But yeah, it's I completely agree with you. And what you were mentioning around sort of, I guess, looking after people, I think it reminds me a bit of the adage of what happens if we train them and they go somewhere else, but what happens if we don't train them and they stay? It's like, do it because you're investing in them for the time that they're there with you, and that's all that we can control, really.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's nothing more rewarding than seeing people progress, right? And reach their potential. And even if I've got nothing but, support and congratulations for people who then leave and go on to something bigger and better. That's the aim. You're kind of building that cadre of people, and with it goes your company's brand. So it's all goodness in the end. It's contributing to the greater good. So I think I've definitely ramped down my competitive mindset over the years, and now definitely in a greater good place.
Yeah, good.
I completely agree. I think that expectations can be spoken about in so many different facets, in what we expect of people, what people expect of us, and that could be a whole topic on its own. One thing I was thinking about as you're talking was actually if we take you back to the event, I remember you spoke about the impact that your current CEO had since joining, specifically referencing how much of a big difference it's made of him having such a kind of clear strategic vision for the future, and the kind of communication of that being so effective. I guess in terms of that, and even thinking about what you think maybe businesses can do better when it comes to things like people initiatives, employee engagement, what's your thoughts around that?
I think so. I think the point you've made is the right one. Is number one is clarity. If you don't have clarity of vision and the direction you're going in, you're kind of hamstrung from the get-go. I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of not understanding that habits are difficult to break and difficult to make. So I think a lot of initiatives are kind of, here's a 3-hour training session, everybody's going to do it, sheep dip time, and then we move on to the next. It just doesn't work. And then the organization has put in thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of hours into these things that have just not stuck. So I think, my learning is that anything you do with people initiatives in terms of building skills, there have to be building blocks to it. And then that has to be repetitive and constant. And you have to go back to it time after time after time. So I think anything you do with people initiatives, like one of our kind of hot topic, I say it's been a hot topic for the last 3 years, is feedback, right? Giving and receiving feedback, which you would not believe how many people are absolutely allergic to doing that. So we do this constantly. We teach it, we experiment with it, we monitor it. And there are still many people who we catch out who just don't want to do it, right? It's not comfortable for them. So it's something that you almost have to hammer a little bit to try and get that into everybody's consciousness. But building that habit for me is absolutely fundamental, because if people have habits that they've developed over the course of their career that are the antithesis to that, breaking it is going to be really hard. So I think repetition is really key. And then again, don't expect perfection. It goes back to kind of some of my earlier points. I don't want anybody in our organization to be fearful that if they get it wrong, they're going to get a slap on the wrist. We are all works in progress on this. So I would much rather people give something a try and get it wrong than just not do it at all. So I think it's allowing people the space to experiment, and actually even use that term. That's been really powerful for us, is using that term experiment to say, this is allowed, this is permissible. You know, you're not gonna, it's okay if you're gonna get this wrong, but keep trying. So yeah, those are kind of top of mind things for me.
I love that. And one thing I'd love to ask you on that is, when you speak about the building blocks and the repetition and needing to reinforce it time and time again, how much work do you feel, whether it's in your organization or more generally, but how much work has to be done to get that buy-in across the entire leadership and then management teams? Because it obviously does have to presumably stem from the top, but there would need to be a lot of work done in order for it to filter through to every part of the organization.
100%. And I think we all know that there is a different management mindset when business is going well versus when business is not going so well. And you have to kind of recognize where your organization is at and what priority the people skills have versus your business performance, and how those people skills are actually going to provide a complement to the business performance and provide kind of bottom line impact. So I talk to my business leaders very much in those terms. I think I think we've evolved, right, over the last 10 years. There used to be 15, 20 years ago, there'd be a lot of business leaders who would be like, this is all just fluffy stuff, this isn't important. Whereas now, and I think definitely post-COVID, people do understand that having the right skilled managers makes a huge impact on whether people stay or go, right? It's a huge contributing factor. And we are able to say through, we do an annual people survey, as I know a lot of people do. We do pulse surveys. We know when people are not being looked after properly. So I think being able to give that data on a continuous basis to your business to say, hey, yeah, we do okay, but we're not brilliant. And we could be so much better. And here's an example of what Blah company is doing. How about we give this a try? I think it's important to keep it top of mind for your business leaders constantly, because it is just one facet realistically of everything they're focusing on, right? And a lot of the time they're focused on their P&L or their bottom line or their sales targets, whatever metric is the most important to them at that time. And you've got to keep reminding them that while they're focused on that, their people are on the receiving end of this poor management skill. So we need to keep going and keep driving that hard. And I think they get it. But I think it is a constant battle to make sure that this really is top of mind for everyone. There are some people who are very much natural leaders. They get it, they want it, they adopt it, they live it. And you've got to use those fantastic kind of leaders, the examples to embed it with other people. There's nothing worse than showing up with a leader to a training session and everybody's thinking, well, he's pretty rubbish at this. What's he doing here? So you've got to pick your exemplars and bring those with you and let people see that there are leaders who live this and really, like I said, just drive it.
It's
You
such a
made a
good
really
point.
good point there. Yeah, and I was going to say the same. I think even when you're talking about how every business, every director, there's always a kind of focus on whether it's shareholders, profits, P&L. But I think actually, if you really think about a business, if you look after your people look after your business, and that's always going to be the case in majority of businesses. Obviously, I know there are certain industries where they're more service aligned and some which are product aligned, but ultimately everyone's having communication with their customers. And I think one of the biggest things, and even something I seen on a LinkedIn post actually the other day, was the difference between how a lot of businesses at the moment are really focusing on leadership, but actually maybe falling down a little bit on management. And how that kind of development even goes there. I guess, what's your perspective on the difference between kind of things like leadership training and management training? Is there a gap?
Yeah, I love that. Management is not really spoken about anymore, is it? It's quite interesting. And I feel sometimes like leadership has got this reputation that leadership is about inspiring everybody and being up on stage and everybody coming back going, oh, wasn't that amazing? It's not that, right? It's leadership, for me, is about being the best version of yourself in managing your team. That's what it's about for me. Because the reality is, not many of us, maybe, I don't know, maybe 2% of us can get up on stage and be an inspirational leader, whatever that means. But many of us can be great people managers, and it doesn't require you to be coming out with sound bites every day. It's not that. But to answer the question, I think being a manager for me is about the fundamentals. So do your team have a good understanding of your expectations? Are you clear on your expectations? Are they clear of the requirements of their role, and do they have objectives for their role? Has that been set? Do they have regular feedback with you? Are you tracking what they do? Are you asking their stakeholders and the people that they work with how they're performing? And are you completing that circle on a regular basis so they know how they're going? So, and then aligned to that, I think it's you having a clear understanding of where they sit in terms of their level of experience. So I often talk to my team about, are you being a teacher? Are you being a coach? Or are you being a mentor? And depending on the experience of the people you're working with, you're going to be one of those three things. So if somebody is coming into your team and they're pretty inexperienced, you're going to be doing a lot of teaching. That's just how it is. You're going to be sat down one-to-one, showing them how to do things, how to work through the process, blah, blah, blah. So that's a kind of teaching mode. Coaching mode is for somebody who is more in the kind of mid-experience stage of their career. It's a bit what you were saying earlier. So they know the answer, but they're kind of a little bit scared to kind of do it by themselves. So you're getting them to that place where they have the confidence to know what they're doing. And their mentor is somebody who's at the top of their game, really, and you're there to kind of spitball with them and to chuck around ideas and for you to kind of give them some help and support that they wouldn't have got elsewhere. So I think it's kind of the whole expectation, job role, feedback process, and then it's the role you play dependent on their experience. That for me is a manager. A leader is somebody who is really has good understanding of all facets of how the team is operating and is looking to leverage the strengths of the team and has a really clear view about how that's going to be done to optimize the performance of the team. And then in addition, you're kind of layering all of the great things on top, like how you develop people, how you give them exposure to the right opportunities, how you're succession planning, how you're role modeling the right behaviors. So I think for me, it's a bit of a woolly answer. I feel like I've blathered on a little bit there, but I feel that's the kind of difference for me. But I would say, I think one thing that people get tripped up on sometimes, and I've been there myself, is people sometimes feel they have to become somebody else to be a leader. It's like an award almost. It's like, oh, I'm a leader all of a sudden. Well, You don't need to. Yeah. I reached the pinnacle. No, you don't need to be anybody else. You just need to be yourself. So don't try and be funny. Don't try and be inspirational. Don't try and be, an act on stage. Just be the best person that you can be in the role, but still be yourself.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I think also, even just talking on that topic, I guess that's where things like imposter syndrome come in with how people are even feeling in terms of who do they need to be in that position. And it's funny because imposter syndrome, like, I feel like you can look at it from so many different perspectives. Stephen Bartlett did, I'm going to keep referencing him because he's the main podcast that I listen to, but he was saying about how like an imposter syndrome, like if you actually change the perspective of that, is if you're feeling those symptoms of imposter syndrome, typically you're feeling uncomfortable. And actually, is that a bad thing? Like, it's just going, because every time you're uncomfortable, you're going through an experience, and from that you're learning, and that's a great place to be. So I've even me and Sinead had conversations a few months ago, and I was like, it's probably the first time I've ever really experienced maybe imposter syndrome. I didn't really know what it was, and I think when you do change that perspective and think of it as that, you kind of then just realize, no, I am being myself, and as long as you're being authentically yourself, it's great. But I absolutely love that. Sinead, have you got anything to add?
Oh, I was just going to say, it was not a woolly answer in the slightest. I was hanging on every single word. And it's such a good point, because I think you're right. I think management is sort of, we just don't speak about it as much anymore, but it is a key, crucial role. And leadership is probably put on a pedestal of, being that sort of inspirational leader. But I feel like that sort of delineation or, difference between the two is super clear. I don't want this podcast to ever end. I want to pick your brains, and I want to keep on extracting information. But I suppose in sort of thinking about the last few questions in terms of leadership, this whole topic, it's obviously a huge topic. But Nick, from your perspective, what is one thing that we haven't touched on today, even though we've touched on a lot, that you do feel really passionately about in this space?
We've touched on it slightly, but I'll kind of say it again. I think soliciting feedback for yourself is fundamental, and it can be brutal, right? I've had two pieces of feedback in my time that both really stick with me, and I will honestly say they were a punch to the gut at the time, but it was something that was really, really good learning for me. So the first was, I was 23 and I was on a management training scheme for Marks and Spencer, my first proper job, I'd say. And the Marks and Spencer, very, very big on 360 feedback all the time. You're like, you're steamrolled by it 24/7. And somebody I'd never met before, but that was the facilitator of a class, said to me, in front of a class of 20 people, Nicola, you've got a face that looks like it's sucking lemons most of the time. But when you smile, your whole face transforms. So you need to do that more.
Whoa. That was brutal.
I was like,
I mean, it's 23 as well.
Yeah, I was actually terrified to be there. I'm from Wales in the UK, and it was my first time in London at a big event, and I was like, oh my god. So that was that kind of taught me that I needed to relax more in situations and just show a little bit more of myself. So that was one piece of very helpful feedback. The second piece was given to me about 3 years ago by one of my current team, which was, you need to make things not all about work. And it was a really good learning point for me, because what she wanted was in our catch-ups, she wanted to just have a bit of chat time, just a bit of what's going on in your life, how was your weekend, before we get into that, right, what's on your list kind of discussion. And I hadn't appreciated that, and we didn't really have that relationship. So that was really good learning for me, that I also, I guess it's a bit on the same theme, just relax a little bit and not make everything always kind of like boom, 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 boom. So I think being open to feedback is is so important, because you just learn so much more about yourself all the time. And if your team don't feel comfortable giving that to you, it says something wider about your leadership style, I think. And I think it goes back to, you know, making your team feel safe enough to do that. So whenever I have my teams, we have a mid-year review and then an annual review. And whenever we do that, I prepare them and say, okay, we're going to talk about you for like the majority of the time. And then at the end, we're going to have some time where you can give feedback on me as well. And if it's all too positive, I will say to them, yeah, that's all very nice, but what about some of the other stuff that you really want to say to me? What are some of the things that I'm not doing so good where I could improve? And then they kind of go, okay, yeah, oh, maybe not this. I'm like, all right, good. So I think it's important. And I see the people who are really confident in their performance, they're quite happy to sit down and have feedback, right? Because they know they're doing a good job. And then there are instances where people are literally cringing in a mid-year review or an annual review because maybe they feel it hasn't been so great. But that is the exact time to ask what's not going well. That's it. That's the exact time, because I never want to get to a position with either my boss or my team where, you know, something has been pent up for 6 months or a year and I don't know about it. We should be always asking these questions. So I think that building that self-awareness, keeping yourself open, considering the feedback, you know, you don't react to the feedback immediately. You've got to really ingest it and have a bit of a think about it. I would say 99% of the feedback I've had has been valid. Sometimes you'll get some feedback and you go, yeah, well, no, but okay. But 99% is valid. And so you've really got everything to gain by doing that.
And can I ask, I absolutely love that. And it's actually something that I've just been listening to. I was speaking to an amazing coach the other day about it and have sort of been thinking about feedback a lot recently. And we just had our quarterly reviews where we're obviously asking and receiving. For organizations that don't have that sort of M&S or Cognizant mentality of 360 feedback at all times, and many don't, where would you say is a good place to start, provided there is psychological safety, but it's just not sort of in the sort of rhythm of how businesses run, I suppose?
Yeah, I was taught a really easy method many years ago to give feedback, because I think there is a fear around giving feedback as well. Because the other thing I would say is the point about being an authentic leader. You don't have to change your personality when you're giving feedback. If it's positive, you don't have to be like, amazing, it's such a great job, you know, and then if it's negative, you don't have to be like, Murr. So I think you have to give feedback in a very factual way, and this structure has always helped me. So we called it the EEC model, and it stands for example, effect, change. So it's the example of what somebody's done, positive or negative, the effect that had on those around them or the situation, and the change that you'd like them to implement in the future. And just having that model for me has made feedback always really easy and really dispassionate. And when I say dispassionate, I mean unemotional. So I think I think it takes a number of people to start the feedback bandwagon, right? So I would select a couple of people who you feel have the skills that they've been able to practice that and do that easily and feel confident with that, and then start that, and it's kind of like a tag, pass it on. So I think if you can do a cascade of that kind of activity, you really don't need any tools or any structure to be able to do that. You just have to make sure that you do it. One of the things that we do around our values might be helpful in this way. So our values kind of drive all of our recognition programs. And at the start of meetings, we say, right, has anybody got a values call out? So somebody who has done something that really exemplifies that one of the values that week. And then we send them a little email saying, hey, we heard that you did this week. Thank you so much for doing that. You exemplify our values. It's so simple, but it has been picked up by so many teams because we started doing that in our leadership team meeting. It's not a company activity. It's not anything anybody has suggested. We just started doing it. And I think feedback can be that easy as well, right? It just needs to be visible, and you just need to practice it.
Yeah, I love that. There is so much
goodness. I had the same question. I was going to ask that the same, because I think there are so many organizations that will listen to this and go, sounds great, but how do I do that? It's reality. And I even think sometimes there's so many things out there at the moment where you're hearing, this is a great thing. And even when you change completely off topic, but social media for children, screen time for children, like there's so many times where you hear that, like, you shouldn't be doing this or they shouldn't be doing that. And you're like, well, we hear all the bad, but what's the solution? And I think, again, with leadership, so often you hear of the kind of constant things of, well, this company's doing that, but actually giving those solutions of how companies can adopt those types of things, I think is where it can really add value. So look, everything I've heard from you today, I feel like you've talked about trust, growth mindset, building psychological safety, self-awareness, feedback, clarity, empathy, like everything, I guess, is the things that we would want to hear. But I think you've just put so much substance behind that. I think that from my side, before we finish up for today, one thing that would be amazing is if you could leave us with a recommendation of a book, a podcast, a quote, anything that you will think our audience will benefit from, or anything that you feel has really added value to you throughout your career or personally.
Okay, I'm going to be really honest and say, I love, I love a bit of lean in. I love a bit of lean in. I've read that book multiple times, and there's always great things in there for me, not just for women. I don't think, actually. I think it's multifaceted. And I love a bit of Brene Brown as well. I think there's always fantastic content with Brene Brown. But I will also be really honest and say the most practical tips and advice I've had have been from leaders I've worked with, from good leaders. And I think I'm quite a curious person. I love people. I'm really interested in people. I'm kind of a little bit obsessed about what makes people tick. And I really like talking to people about what they've learned and where they've come from and what's worked for them and what their reflections are and what didn't work. I sometimes think that what didn't work is more interesting in some ways, because then you flip it and understand what you should have done. And so I can be found at many social events picking people's brains on these kinds of things. So I think it's really important to find those people who you think are really good at what they do, and find out how they did it. Right? I think it's really interesting to get people's life experience. But I will say, I think this is a very, very boring quote, but it continues to be something that is constantly top of mind for me, is you are only as good as your weakest link in a team. And so everybody knows in their team who the weakest link is, whether they want to admit it or not. And you need to focus your time on that situation, because everybody else is probably very, very capable of doing what they need to do. So don't waste time on giving them tips, pointers, because they're already super capable. Spend your time on the people that really need it. And if it's not working out, make decisions quickly, because I think time is important. And it's also important to be respectful to people, and nobody wants to be in a situation where they're failing for months and months and months and months. So I think spend time with the people who really need it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think similar to you, we probably have the same, us being in the world of recruitment, we have the same level of curiosity of just humans' backstories and what got them to where they are. And it's genuinely the reason why I got into recruitment. We could call it nosiness or curiosity. Literally the whole the backstory of what got people to this moment in this room is just my pure fascination. So
I get cursed by my husband and my kids every time we're in an Uber. I end up finding out their life story, and my kids are like, "Mum, can you just stop talking?" And honestly, I'm interested. I find it fascinating where people come from.
Absolutely.
But honestly, it's been a pleasure.
Maybe we could make a TV show out of that, the three of us, right?
We'll go around videoing people. We could probably go far. I mean, they're all out there nowadays.
I know.
Absolutely.
Honestly, look, thank you so much for jumping on. We said we'd keep you for about half an hour, and we managed to rinse your knowledge for about 50 minutes. So we are honestly incredibly grateful. Soph, I know you feel the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, like from our event that we had in Brisbane, the amount of feedback we had on you was, I mean, on all of the panelists, but yeah, people just loved. I think the way that you articulate things, you're very much a storyteller as well. Like, I feel like the way that you communicate, a lot of people can very much buy in and listen. And I think that's your natural style. I'm saying smile now because you're not doing the, you've been trained for your
I bet you've been smiling since that feedback, right?
Yeah. I know, totally
smiling. But no, honestly, it's been a pleasure. And like I said, yeah, all the feedback that we had was just incredible. So we're very excited to have you here, and looking forward to putting this out into the big wide world. And I'm sure lots of value to be added.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for having me. It's been great fun.
Brilliant. Thank you.